elsewhere. The tremor measures 8 on the Richter scale, and its impact is felt as far as Taipei and Bangkok. Early May and Cyclone Nargis hits Myanmar, killing up to 140,000 people and leaving 1 million homeless. The UN blasts Myanmar's military government, saying its refusal to let in foreign aid workers to help victims is unprecedented in the history of humanitarian work and worsens the situation. 10 days later, on May the 12th, a devastating earthquake strikes China, killing nearly 70,000 people, leaving 5 million homeless and 4,000 children orphaned. Wenchuan County in Sichuan province bears the brunt of the disaster. A local official warns many people are feared dead after rows of houses collapse in the city of Dujiangyan near the epicenter. The impact of the tremor is felt throughout China and the region. Taiwan's Central Weather Bureau said it took about 8 minutes for the quake wave to reach the island.
It was kind of like the kind of turbulence you have on an aircraft, and it was some lateral shaking.
Even the Thai capital, Bangkok, feels the impact of the quake more than 3,000 kilometers away. Back in Sichuan, more than 500,000 houses are toppled. One by one, people dead or alive are pulled out of the rubble in Dujiangyan. Survivors still are found more than 24 hours after the quake. Rescue work is slow and tedious. Rescuers remove debris from toppled buildings by hand for fear of further collapses. In the epicenter in Wenchuan, there's an exodus from the town after a series of aftershocks, some of them reaching more than 6 on the Richter scale. In the Tibetan Chiang Autonomous Prefecture of Aba, more than 2,000 tourists are trapped. Among them, these cable car passengers who were stranded for more than 24 hours. Most of them are elderly Taiwanese, and one by one they're brought to safety. The broken roads to Bechuan in Sichuan are littered with giant boulders. Major roads are impassable, blocked by vehicles buried in landslides. Troops managed to reopen some of the paths, and survivors in remote villages slowly make their way to safety. About 80% of the houses topple, and more than 1,000 people are buried alive when a school collapses. In Myanju, about 40 kilometers southeast of the epicenter, the death toll has reached 1,500. This is what's left of a primary school. More than 10 children were found alive. They are the lucky ones. An estimated 10,000 people remain unaccounted for. There are makeshift hospitals all over Sichuan province, and rescue work is hampered by a cut in water and electricity supplies. Premier Wen Jiabao, who arrived at the disaster zone 7 hours after the tremor hit, oversees relief efforts. He does what he can to give a ray of hope to those buried under the rubble. Hold on, the rescue teams are on their way, he tells victims using a megaphone. He sees for himself the rescue effort at a school where more than 100 students were in classes when the building came down. The power of the massive earthquake hit the smaller towns and counties the hardest. At Juyuan Township, the secondary school is virtually unrecognizable. The middle and sides of the 3-story building cave in, leaving 2 bare stairwells. Fears of aftershock drive many from their homes, forcing them to seek refuge at open-air stadiums, and many ponder what's going to happen next and where they're going to go. The tremor also spreads to vast areas of Gansu, triggering mudslides in many parts of the province. Worst hit was the county of Longnan, where the ground literally opens up. Houses collapse. Many counties are without power, and telecommunication is disrupted. In Chongqing, scores of people are killed. Among them, those buried under the rubble of what used to be a school in Liangpin. The army in Beijing and Tianjin gradually bring in about 28 million yuan's worth of food, blankets, medicine and electricity generators. The United Nations offers to send in rescue teams, but this is easier said than done.
So transportation and access to disaster-hit region is a difficult issue for us. So now conditions is not yet ripe for us to allow international rescue teams to enter into China or to go to the disaster-hit area.
The People's Liberation Army directs the rescue effort. Soldiers gradually reach disaster areas cut off by broken roads and landslides in Sichuan province. Troops work overnight to reopen roads to the epicenter in Wenchuan as aftershocks and continuous rain hamper rescue efforts. The weather is on their side when morning comes on March 14th. And so began the long trek into the heart of the disaster zone, a township called Yingqiu, along broken bridges, past landslides. The loosened earth is a challenge even for the fittest, and some are unable to escape from the falling debris. Also making their way to Yingqiu are people whose loved ones are stranded. My entire family is there, said one woman. Earlier, soldiers were able to reach Yingqiu via the rivers. 300 people are brought to safety in this way, but only a quarter of the 12,000 residents are known to have survived. Blocked roads leading to one of the worst affected counties, Mianzhu, mean heavy machinery is unable to reach this collapsed school. Anxious parents watch as rescuers pull out more than 10 seriously injured children. Premier Wen Jiabao visits children in Mianyang orphaned by the earthquake. But no words of reassurance that her future would be taken care of could console one child. May 15th, and more than 20 townships and villages still cannot be accessed because of broken roads and landslides. At least 10 million people are homeless, and the possible spread of diseases is also threatening survivors. 110,000 soldiers are now involved in the rescue operation, some of them parachuted into disaster areas that cannot be accessed in any other way. For rescuers who are able to carry on, this is a very disheartening mission. This group is working on what's left of a primary school. We hear the cries of children from under the rubble. Sometimes they're only a few meters away, but we just can't reach them, one person sighed. 3 of those they managed to pull out are already dead. May 16th, and President Hu Jintao sees for himself the scale of the devastation. In Mianyang, he meets with Premier Wen Jiabao, and they discuss strategies to speed up the operation. President Hu visits some of the worst-hit areas of Sichuan. As Hu leaves, public security officers pushed and dragged away desperate family members who tried to plead their case. They also stopped our cameras from filming. Children are still buried under a kindergarten, and rescuers have stopped digging, she said. We just want to tell our leaders what's happening here. With each passing day and more bodies being recovered, there is rising concern for those who remain in the disaster zone. With bodies piling up and no running water, the region of Sichuan now faces the spectre of another killer, disease.
Measles, diarrhea, damaged cholera, and also diphtheria, things like that. The water supply and also the sanitation is also very severely damaged after the disaster.
Day 6, or May 17th, and a major scare in the hard-hit areas of Sichuan. Fears that a dam would burst forced the evacuation of thousands of people there. The massive evacuation halts much of the rescue work there. Still, more than 160 survivors were rescued throughout the devastation zone, including a German tourist who'd been trapped for 114 hours and a primary school girl who was trapped under her collapsed school. There's another natural disaster in China in 2008, a major snowstorm, and another man-made one in the form of milk powder. Meanwhile, unrest grips the Tibet Autonomous Region, but there is some joy as the nation hosts an impressive Summer Olympic Games. We'll have more on that when we come back. Welcome back. Extreme weather once again hits China in 2008. The worst winter storm in 5 decades causes massive transport bottlenecks and power outages across huge areas in the lead-up to the Lunar New Year. The weather affects at least 105 million people in all, leaves 107 dead, and triggers a shortage of basic goods in some areas. The bad weather hit places in central and southern China that have no experience or equipment to deal with such conditions, leaving 5.8 million people stranded at train stations. Blackouts cut electricity needed to run the trains, create a massive backlog in Guangzhou and strand 800,000 there alone. What little order there is at Guangzhou's main railway station is precarious for days. Finally, travellers lose their patience. Men, women and children, along with their luggage, pile on top of each other. People at the back continue to surge forward. Stand back, people are getting hurt, the police shout. The message did not get through. There are a few minor injuries. September, and Premier Wen Jiabao orders a thorough inspection of all dairy products around the country. That after desperate parents gathered at the Sanlu Group's headquarters in Hebei province, demanding to know why their children had fallen ill after being fed milk powder which had been produced there. Destroying our children is worse than murder. Why don't you come out and own up? One shouts. According to the state-run Xinhua news agency, investigators find that farmers added a chemical, melamine, to the milk to disguise the fact that it had been diluted with water. Melamine is normally used in the production of plastic and fertilizer. One chemist warns that the consequences could be grave even for the surviving children.
This compound can pose a health hazard to rats, in particular related to kidney disease and the formation of kidney stones. And the worst is it could produce cancer in the urinary bladders for long-term exposure.
Mainland authorities order Sanlu to halt production. Gansu, Hebei and Jiangsu provinces are worst affected, although there are signs of contamination closer to home. In Guangdong, at least 8 children became ill as a result of drinking the milk. 2 of those are in Shenzhen. In Hong Kong, 10 fall ill. Melamine is eventually also found in Yili Natural Choice yogurt ice cream bars sold in Hong Kong. And on October the 25th, the Hong Kong government announces the discovery of melamine in eggs for the first time, promoting fears more of the territory's food supply is contaminated. 5 senior officials in Hebei are sacked, including Sanlu's chief executive Qian Wenhua, who also holds a post in the province's party committee, and the mayor of the provincial capital, Xu Zhuanghuang. China's top official in charge of quality control, Li Changjiang, also resigns as the tainted milk scandal continues to grow in Asia. Malaysia joins neighbouring Singapore in imposing a ban on Chinese milk products, while a dairy company in Japan recalled products contaminated milk imported from China. Myanmar also announces it would seize and destroy imported Chinese baby formula. And as September comes to a close, Indonesia claims that high traces of melamine were found in Oreo wafers, M&Ms and Snickers imported from China. British chocolate maker Cadbury also announced tests that cast doubt on the safety of its Chinese-made products and order a recall. And on November 13th, the US Food and Drug Administration bans all products from China containing milk. According to figures issued by mainland health authorities on December the 1st, as many as 6 babies were killed and more than 300,000 were sickened after consuming contaminated milk powder. China is also hit by unrest in 2008. March the 14th and riots erupt in the Tibetan capital Lhasa during protests against Chinese rule, the most serious disturbance there in 20 years. Monks and police are locked in a tense confrontation. Some protesters hurl stones and other objects at officers who seek to contain the situation by surrounding the monks. Tempers flare at times. As night falls, some of the monks are taken away by the police. Separately, an Australian tourist films Tibetan men with sticks rioting and targeting Chinese shops and businesses in Lhasa. Several vehicles are overturned or burned. Shops are also set on fire. In Beijing, the chairman of Tibet's regional government, Changba Pungo, accused separatists outside China, led by the Dalai Lama, of organizing the trouble in Lhasa. Criminals in Tibet, he said, used the opportunity to disrupt social order. Some Han Chinese-owned businesses suffer extensive damage and looting, prompting their owners to leave town. Most shops remain boarded up. Meanwhile, Premier Wen Jiabao claims that Beijing has evidence about who is behind the arrest.
There is ample fact, and we also have plenty of evidence proving that this incident was organized, premeditated, masterminded, and incited by the Dalai clique.
His remarks come at a news conference following the closing session of the National People's Congress. The Premier added the riots in Tibet were incited with the aim of sabotaging the Summer Olympic Games in Beijing and prove that the Dalai Lama's ultimate goal is Tibetan independence.
Tibet has moved forward, and Tibet has become more developed. And those claims that the Chinese government is engaged in so-called cultural genocide are nothing but lies.
The official Xinhua news agency says 19 people are killed in the arrest, but the Dalai Lama's Tibetan government in exile claims 80 people died in the clashes. The Olympic torch also becomes a target for pro-Tibet and human rights protesters as it travels around the world. In London, one tries to grab it. In Paris, officials put out the flame and place the torch on a bus after protesters get too close. China faces other problems as the Olympics approach, such as criticism of internet censorship, still lingering pollution, and a terrorist attack in Kashgar, killing 16 policemen. But the opening ceremonies and games go off without a hitch, except for a senseless act of violence that kills an American, as 205 countries and regions participate, the highest number ever in the history of the Olympic Games. China wins 51 gold medals, its best Olympic performance ever, and the most of any country or region. But there was a great disappointment for the whole nation. Liu Qiang drops out of the 110-meter hurdles final because of injury. September the 25th, and the whole nation is elated once again as China successfully launched its Shenzhou 7 space mission, another historical milestone in its manned space program. A delighted President Hu Jintao was at the launch pad with other senior officials to watch the rocket take off and congratulated the 3 astronauts on the successful launch. September the 27th, China successfully performs its first spacewalk. The honour goes to astronaut Chai Ji-kang, who ventures outside the spacecraft for about 15 minutes. It's the climax of the 68-hour Shenzhou 7 mission and marks a new chapter in China's manned space program. China is now the 3rd country after the United States and the former Soviet Union to perform the feat.
And we leave you tonight with more pictures of the opening ceremonies. Good night and have a great 2009.
elections across the Taiwan Strait. Legislative elections on January the 12th put the pan-blue camp firmly in control of the legislature. The Kuomintang achieves an overwhelming victory, taking 81 of the 113 legislative seats, a larger than expected win. The DPP, which had been the largest single party in the legislature, wins just 27. President Chen Shui-bian steps down after the embarrassing parliamentary defeat. Presidential candidate Frank Hsieh becomes the party's acting chairman. The KMT victory sets the stage for a pivotal presidential contest in March. On election day, March 22nd, Kuomintang candidate Ma Ying-jeou claims victory, putting an end to 8 years of DPP rule. At a press conference that evening, Ma says he will only consider a peace deal with China if it dismantles missiles aimed at Taiwan. Taiwan's Vice President-elect, Vincent Hsu, holds a historic meeting with President Hu Jintao on the sidelines of the Boao Forum on April the 12th. It's the highest-level encounter between a mainland leader and an elected Taiwan official since the two sides split in 1949. Another landmark meeting promises to open a new page in cross-strait ties. Talks on May 28th between President Hu Jintao and Kuomintang Chairman Wu Po-sheng are the first between top leaders of the ruling parties on both sides of the strait. June 12th, and formal dialogue resumes in Beijing between Taiwan and the mainland following an almost 10-year stoppage. The two sides agreed to set up representative offices to ease exchanges and travel for people across the Taiwan Strait. They will also work together in oil exploration. The next day, the mainland and Taiwan sign landmark agreements to begin regular direct weekend charter flights and open up Taiwan to mainland tourists. Those flights begin on July the 4th for the first time in 6 decades. On November the 3rd, the most senior mainland envoy to visit Taiwan in half a century, Chen Yunlin, arrives in Taipei for a 5-day visit. The president of the Association for Relations Across the Taiwan Strait signs agreements on direct flights and cargo shipping, as well as cooperation in postal services and food safety. Daily cross-strait flights begin on December the 15th. And on November 21st, Taiwan and the mainland have held their highest-level meeting in an international setting since 1949. President Hu Jintao meets with Taiwan's former Premier Lian Chan at the APEC summit in Lima, Peru. Also in 2008, former President Chen Shui-bian comes under investigation again and quits the Democratic Progressive Party following reports his family's alleged involvement in money laundering. On November the 11th, he is arrested. Prosecutors claim to have found sufficient evidence against Chen for that and corruption and embezzlement. Chen charges he's the victim of the Kuomintang's attempt to improve relations with the mainland and goes on a hunger strike. Still, on December the 12th, he is indicted.
We next go from political earthquakes to natural ones. China and the rest of Asia are hit by major natural disasters in 2008. We'll have more on that.
Pakistan's government blames Al-Qaeda. 2 more luxury hotels and a Jewish centre are targeted by Muslim extremists on November 26th in Mumbai. A 60-hour rampage through India's financial capital kills 170 people. It's the 7th and most deadly terrorist attack in India in 2008, horrifying Indians and the world at large. Indonesians react calmly to the death of a man who led them for 32 years. Former President and strongman Suharto dies at the age of 86 after suffering multiple organ failure. Suharto is both reviled and worshipped by Indonesians. Some credit him with developing the country into an Asian power. Others believe he was a brutal and corrupt dictator. Whatever the case, it's the end of an era for the world's largest Muslim country. Another leader with the same reputation doesn't die but is ailing. Cuba's Fidel Castro announces his retirement after almost half a century at the helm. He's replaced by his brother Raul. February 28th in Thailand, ousted Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra makes an emotional return from exile. Thaksin is taken to court to face corruption charges and freed on $250,000 bail. But in August the 11th, Thaksin announces in a handwritten statement faxed to different news outlets while at the Beijing Olympics that he's jumping bail and fleeing to London, claiming he could not receive a fair trial because his political enemies are interfering in the courts to finish him and his family off. His political enemies also go after his successor and ally, Samak Sundarve. After 100 days of protest led by the People's Alliance for Democracy, they shut down much of the country's utilities and transportation. Samak declares a state of emergency on September the 2nd and calls on Thais the next day to decide in a referendum if they want him to resign, as protesters demand. The people never decide, but the Constitutional Court does on September 9th, ruling that Samak's appearance on a TV cooking show while in office posed a conflict of interest under the law. The decision automatically removes him from office. But protesters aren't swayed to go home as the new Prime Minister is Thaksin's brother-in-law, Somchai Wongsavat. They forced the closure of Thailand's two main airports, severing commercial links and leaving 300,000 passengers stranded. On December the 2nd, a court ruling dissolves three parties in the ruling coalition and bans Somchai from politics for 5 years. Protesters leave the airports, ending an 8-day blockade. Somchai's exit clears the way for opposition Democrat Party leader Abhisit Vejjajiva. On December the 15th, he wins a thin majority in a parliamentary vote with the help of defectors from the ruling camp to become Thailand's third prime minister in as many months. In Malaysia, a wake-up call for Prime Minister Abdullah Badawi. His ruling Barisan Nasional coalition fails to win a two-thirds majority in parliament for the first time since 1969. Things are just as bad at the state level. The ruling coalition loses power in the state assemblies in Penang, Selangor, Kedah and Perak. Analysts cite a strong voter backlash against rising crime and inflation, as well as discontent among Chinese and Indian minorities complaining about discrimination. The leader of the opposition, Anwar Ibrahim, tries to bring down the Malaysian government with parliamentary defections in the ruling coalition. But that attempt suffers a setback in June when he is hit by a sodomy accusation for the second time in 10 years. Anwar dismisses it as a political conspiracy. August the 26th, and Anwar comes close to toppling the ruling National Front by scoring a resounding parliamentary election victory that puts him in a position to challenge for Malaysia's premiership. And in Nepal, former communist rebels win more than double the number of parliamentary seats of their nearest rival. The party of the former insurgents, the Communist Party of Nepal, form the backbone of the new government and usher in sweeping changes to the impoverished Himalayan nation. Among the biggest, the abolition of Nepal's 239-year-old monarchy.
There are more political storms across the globe in 2008. The year sees a new nation born. Fortunately, violence is largely avoided. Fighting also ebbs in Iraq, but increases in Afghanistan. We'll have more on that when we come back. Bush makes his first trip to the Middle East, and he makes a bold statement while appearing at a news conference with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, but it proves a bit premature.
US President George W. Bush says he firmly believes there will be a signed peace deal between Israel and the Palestinians. And Bush said he is confident that a Palestinian state will emerge.
There will be a signed peace treaty by the time I leave office.
But Israel's Prime Minister says not so fast.
there will be no peace unless terror is stopped.
In 2008, Iran defies 3 sets of UN sanctions demanding it cease its nuclear program. North Korea is more forthcoming as it blows up a cooling tower at its Yongbyon nuclear reactor, preventing it from producing any more weapons-grade plutonium. But disputes over a US terrorism blacklist and verification demands lead to on and off again North Korean disabling. 5 years ago, the US went to war in Iraq to eliminate a regime it said was producing weapons of mass destruction. In 2008, it's different weapons they have to contend with: suicide bombers and roadside bombs. Still, the US surge, the growing competence of Iraqi forces and reconciliation with Sunnis inflict serious damage on militants, insurgents and Al-Qaeda. Iraqi and coalition casualties also plummet in Iraq in 2008, and Baghdad and the US sign a status of forces agreement requiring US troops to leave by 2011. But Afghanistan is a different story. In the summer of 2008, annual American casualties in Afghanistan surpassed those in Iraq. In fact, 2008 is the deadliest year for Americans there since 2002. South America and the Colombian government makes lots of headway in 2008 against the region's most powerful and longest insurgency. It's capped off on July 2nd by a dramatic operation which frees 15 hostages from the revolutionary armed forces of Colombia, including former presidential candidate Ingrid Betancourt, held for 6 years. Also in 2008, one of the world's most sought-after war crimes fugitives is arrested after being on the run for more than a decade. Former Bosnian Serb leader Radovan Karadzic is captured in Belgrade by Serbian security forces. He's accused of committing crimes against humanity and ethnic cleansing during the war in the Balkans in the 1990s and is put on trial by the International Criminal Court in The Hague. A state of emergency is declared in East Timor after a double assassination attempt leaves the country's president, José Ramos Horta, critically injured. Prime Minister Janana Gusmao escapes unhurt. Additional Australian troops are sent to bolster security. The East Timor government was born out of a guerrilla movement which fought for independence against Indonesia. A similar armed group in Kosovo also became a political movement and attains its goal on February the 17th. On that day, Kosovo's parliament declares independence, a move recognised by the United States, several European countries and Australia. In Pristina, Kosovo's capital, they rejoice. But in Serbia's capital, Belgrade, they display anger, much of it directed at America, in the first major outburst of anti-Western sentiment there since Slobodan Milosevic was ousted in 2000. Serb protesters attack the US embassy. Massed ranks of police in riot gear face a barrage of flares and other missiles, but still push protesters away from the embassy. McDonald's restaurants were also vandalized. One person dies and 150 people are injured in the violence. Nearly 200 people are arrested and 90 shops are ransacked. August the 8th, and Georgia tries to avoid the same fate as Serbia, losing Kosovo by making a grab for the breakaway region of South Ossetia. Then Russia, a supporter of the separatists, intervenes, marking Moscow's first military action against a former Soviet republic since the 1991 collapse of the Soviet Union. Over a week of fighting and bombing leaves at least 2,000 dead. The Russians take their time leaving, and on August the 26th, Moscow recognizes the breakaway regions as independent countries. China seeks to put aside a history of turbulent relations with neighbor Japan in early May. President Hu Jintao arrives in Tokyo for China's highest-level visit to Japan in 10 years. President Hu hails progress toward resolving a dispute over energy rights in the East China Sea. But the improvement in Sino-Japanese relations may not last. On September 1st, highly unpopular Japanese Prime Minister Yasuo Fukuda abruptly resigns. The Prime Minister, whose priority was warmer ties with Beijing, is replaced by Taro Aso, an ardent nationalist. A change in government in Taiwan also marks a major breakthrough in relations